My guest today is Julio Rosas, senior writer at Town Hall and author of the new book, Fiery but Mostly Peaceful, The 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. Julio, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Doug.
I am very excited to have this interview because this was a topic that I think was completely botched by the mainstream media, and it affected so much about how we viewed their coverage of these types of events, but it also viewed how we were trusting this coverage of like kind of things in general. So you were at a lot of these riots that happened back in 2020. Can you paint us a picture of what most of these riots looked like?
Well, for the riot portion, because usually when it comes to these things, so overall it's a very fluid situation, just no matter what, especially because we have lots of people out and they're emotional, right? A lot of things can happen, and so there were protests, and that's kind of one of the things. Like, well, what about the peaceful protests? No, there were, but and this is what you were alluding to earlier, is that there were also riots, and so with riots, it was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, and with my background growing up in Wheaton, Illinois, that's where Wheaton College is at. Suburbs, 45 minutes out of Chicago. It was great. Like, it was good life in terms of that, because it's not like we're in a third world country. But when it came to places like Minneapolis, and Minneapolis today for me is like the worst riot I covered in terms of scale, in terms of damage, in terms of just chaoticness, because what I talk about in the book actually at the very beginning was I had covered Antifa Proud Boy face-offs in Portland, right, in Portland, Oregon, and that's not necessarily a riot per se. It's just like a giant street brawl, but you go a couple blocks away and everything's like just kind of going normal. But with like Minneapolis, for example, I had to figure out, oh wait. So I flew in from Los Angeles because that's where I was staying during the COVID lockdowns. I was thinking, oh wait, I had to figure out how am I going to get from the airport to my hotel, and how am I going to get from the hotel down to South Minneapolis, which is kind of the epicenter was for everything. And so I had to hit up a local contact, and I had a friend, and he helped pick me up. And but it just, even as something as simple as what we consider a normal society of like, oh yeah, if you go to an airport, there's going to be, you have public transportation with like a taxi, Uber, there was none of that.
Really?
There was nothing running because everyone just was scared. Everyone didn't. I mean, by the time I got there, that was day 3 of riots. Things calmed down during the day, but then at night things turn up, and so people were really just kind of bracing and preparing for that Thursday night. And the Thursday night that I was there, that's when the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct was ordered to be evacuated and was set on fire. And so really, overall, when riots happen, it's just a free for all.
Now you were there, like I said. So could you maybe like talk to us about that night that the precinct was burned down? I mean, you were there. I'm assuming you felt the flames. You felt all this stuff. Yeah. Like what was that like?
It was so. I mean, like I said, I'd never seen police officers run. And it wasn't even because they necessarily wanted to. I'm sure some did, but we later found out that they were ordered to by the mayor, Jacob Frey. And you can imagine. So George Floyd died on Sunday. The video went viral that Monday, the following day, and then that very first day when people were protesting and rioting. I mean, literally that first day outside the police precinct. So for that entire week, a lot of the anger and a lot of the action and rioting was taking place at the precinct, but as time went on and people realized like, oh, we can start getting away with whatever we want because all the police in this area are holed up in this building because they're being preoccupied. That's when it started to kind of spread out. So that Thursday, it really reached a fever pitch. I mean, I really wish I got it on video, but people were shouting to burn the police station with the officers still inside. I mean, they wanted to kill these officers. And it quickly became very untenable for them to hold their position because not only was the front portion of the police station breached, but also the back portion. And actually we later found out that they couldn't open up the gate to let the vehicles out because someone had just jammed it. Or so when they were getting their vehicles out, they just had to bash the gate out. I mean that's how dedicated these rioters were to try to kill these guys. But I mean, you could just feel the jubilation within the BLM crowd once they realized that their actions were really having their desired effect to at a minimum push the cops out of the area, and they did, and you know, they went as soon as the cops left. I mean, that there was no law enforcement presence at all after that point, and it invigorated them. They said that they wanted to go to the 5th police precinct, which was a straight shot down west about 2 to 3 miles, so that they could burn that police. I mean, they were just so happy at that moment, because they were really trying to accomplish of this kind of revolution that they wanted. And you know, when we talk about abolishing the police, I'm like, well, that kind of already happened, and it was absolutely disastrous in Minneapolis, and even to this day. And you know, again, talk about it in the book and the aftermath. Like it was very, very devastating for that, especially South Minneapolis.
I'm curious if you were able to interact with some of the rioters. So I have a sort of a 2-part question. One, did you talk with any of the rioters? Were they willing to speak with you? And then 2, we've seen in certain circumstances where reporters for conservative outlets are recognized by, you know, some of these people of the leftist persuasion, right? Like Antifa will generally recognize Andy Ngo when he goes out and does coverage, and they'll try and
even people who aren't Andy Ngo, they'll still harass because they're racists.
Right. But were you ever recognized by any of these rioters and pursued?
So it's kind of tricky. You obviously, I do want to get people's perspective on, hey, why are you writing? But obviously, the next question is, well, who are you with? And it's kind of hard to say, well, I'm from Town Hall, and I go on Fox News every once in a while, so please talk to me. So I in those hectic, well, even in like a hectic situation like a riot, it is hard just to talk to anybody, because they're too busy rioting. and in which case, that's fine with me, because I'll just film that. But in terms of getting recognized, no, I wouldn't, especially at the very beginning, because I'd only been on Fox News once prior to that. So that was kind of the benefit of starting out with not having a super large following already, not being like an Andy Ngo off the bat. I covered some Antifa, some Proud Boy stuff prior to that, but I mean, I covered Charlottesville back in 2017 during that whole hot mess. But even back then, my coverage, at least on Twitter, didn't gain that much traction, because like my following was way smaller. But covering Charlottesville like really solidified my desire to cover these types of events. That's why I started going there in the first place. But I always joke that I'm glad that mask wearing was a thing, because I would always just cover up my face as time went on, and I was starting to, you know, my tweets would go viral, and you know, people were reading my stories. And going on Fox News a lot more. I mean, there's literally one point where I was on Fox News every night for a week, and actually I had to say no to them on the last day of that Friday, because I had already like, look, I need a break. That was probably like my worst interview, because like my mind was just like so melted from everything. But so I haven't been recognized in a bad way. I have been accosted once or twice, but it wasn't because they recognized me. They just saw that I was a reporter.
So they were attacking reporters. They didn't even care if it was a right, left, or center reporter.
Yeah, and it was just, I mean, that's the thing. Even if you're someone like CNN, I mean, as a garbage news outlet that is, people still, I mean, that's not just people on the right. A lot of people on the left also hate CNN. Right. And the example that comes to mind with that was with Brooklyn Center in 2021 after the Dante Wright situation. I can't remember her name, but the female CNN reporter, she was being accosted and like heckled by their camera, their security guy got hit in the head with a frozen water bottle and knocked him out. So I mean, and this is why and this is what's so confusing about why the media, the rest of the mainstream media, coddles and like makes excuses for left-wing rioters and BLM. Is like, they're not your friends either.
Right.
Like they will attack you just as easily as they'll attack someone like me or some of my colleagues. So it's not the fact that even if they're attacking you, you then portray them in an unfair light. It's just you show what's happening.
Right.
What's happening, and that's what I did, and that's what a few others did, and obviously they didn't like us for that, because we were showing what they were actually up to and what they were doing. But it's then okay. So especially if they're going to attack you, so you should definitely tell the truth of what's going on. But then, like the title of the book, you know, fiery but mostly peaceful, CNN ran in Kenosha. It's just I don't know why. I think it's just because they really believe that the ends justify the means when it comes to that type of coverage.
Right. I want to kind of focus on one city in particular, and again, cards on the table. We talked about this a little bit beforehand. I am from Portland, Oregon. So when I was watching this coverage, it really hurt me because I recognized a lot of the places that were getting destroyed. Did you have the opportunity in writing this book to talk with some of the other residents of these cities, maybe Portland in particular, who just said, I don't know what's going on. What is happening? Why is my city on fire?
Yeah. Over the course of during my coverage of the riots, and then months afterwards when I went back to like Minneapolis and Kenosha, but with Portland specifically, I mean, I talked to one gentleman, and his business was located right across the street from the Immigration Customs Enforcement station, which is a very common target for the local Antifa groups there, and so because the ICE officers and the Federal Protective Service, they protect the building. So because after the initial attack, they then get pushed back, and so then they start kind of damaging other property that's left unguarded. And so his place has been broken into before, windows have been smashed. And he told me, I mean, he was just so beat down from everything because that was like I said, that was far from the first time that he had to be out there to like shoo people away because he said like, all I want is just sleep. I mean, just like this, a very basic human need, and he wasn't getting it because these punks were just constantly trying to pick a fight with federal officers in the name of anti-fascism. Right. And so so that was one of the hard things with covering the riots, and then in the aftermath too, because these were ordinary Americans who, in virtually every case, they had nothing to do with whatever was causing the riot in the first place, and yet they were bearing the brunt of this anger, and that's why I've become a real. A lot of people, you would think a lot of people would be against rioting, but apparently not. But for me personally, I just don't like rioting because I have just seen the negative consequences of it. And then the anger comes when I see, again, people with bigger platforms saying, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal, or it's property, there's insurance, and just all this other nonsense. But and a lot of people who say that are privileged with having a stable income, especially during, and then, of course, on top of everything was the COVID lockdowns. Right. And so the negative effects from the COVID lockdowns was already pronounced for months. And then even if the business wasn't burned down, if it was still ransacked, I mean, that's still thousands of dollars that they might not already have, or they might have had, but they didn't because, well, the government said, no, you can't open your business. Yeah.
I mean, that kind of reminds me of like maybe what the day after would look like, right? Obviously, we saw a lot of this rioting happening at night, and then the days would be a little more peaceful. What did it look like as you were wandering around? I'm sure you did coverage of this, but were you wandering around the city streets just in the aftermath of a lot of these riots?
It was weird because like sometimes it would just be like people would still be out and about cleaning up and people just looking at the damage and just still going about their daily lives, and it was kind of quiet in some regards, and it was just it was really the calm before the storm, and that was really pronounced in places like Kenosha, Wisconsin. But for me, the one that really disturbed me the most was Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is about an hour northwest of Kenosha, outside of Milwaukee, and that riot happened because there was even pre George Floyd, a black officer shot a black 17-year-old who had fired a gun and was pointing the gun in the officer's direction. So he shot in self-defense. Right. And so the Milwaukee district attorney didn't charge the black officer with any wrongdoing because it's like, well, he's justified. Well, because this was happening post George Floyd, everyone, there was a riot. And surprise. So there was literally a BLM caravan from Milwaukee where they started the protest and made their way to Wauwatosa, and as soon as they entered the city limits, that's when they started attacking buildings. They attacked people's homes where people were at home at night. I mean, it was really bad in that regard. But I'd never been to Wauwatosa before, and I had gotten there at night. Like I got there just as things started to unravel. And so the next morning, when I went to go out and cover the damage and see people do the rinse and repeat of people repairing and trying to get interviews with all that. Wauwatosa is very similar to Wheaton, and where that it's a suburb. And when I was walking the street, these neighborhoods, I was just like shocked that I could have been back home in Wheaton. Like this literally could have been my hometown if the circumstances just apparently happened just south of here, and that was really jarring. There were homes decorated for Thanksgiving and Halloween and just like all this stuff, and yet just the night prior, the people were going crazy because of justified police action, and that was. really kind of the start of being blackpilled.
Yeah, yeah.
In the sense of like, because I was starting to think that, well, it's starting to get colder now. Like, you'd think they don't like rioting when it's cold, but it was still it was still happening. Like we were past the summer of love.
Yeah,
we were into this now fall and into like, so it was like, is this ever going to stop? And it was really, I was getting really concerned about with the election, because the election was just before that and how that was going to turn out. And so I was just really worried about, is there going to be not even just riots, but is there going to be like a civil war of some kind, or like an insurgency? Like, I don't know. And so obviously we didn't have that because the election turned out differently, and Derek Chauvin was found guilty. But there was all these points where I was thinking that we were going to fall off a cliff, and we haven't done that. And we've kind of pulled back from it a little bit, but we're in such a worse spot than we were in terms of like national unity than prior to 2020. And part of the reason for the book is to talk about here's what happened in 2020, and here's its aftermath. And if we continue down this path, it's not going to be good.
Mm. I mean, I think that this book is so timely, especially since we are still reflecting on the aftermath of those types of things. Are we seeing any data to suggest that the American people are buying that media narrative that these riots were isolated incidents over a sort of massive sea of peaceful protesting?
A little bit. It's a little difficult now because this is now all in the aftermath of January 6th, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really frustrating covering that, because right away, as soon as people started going crazy on January 6th, the media was like, "Oh yeah, this is a riot." They had no problem using the riot, but then they took it a step further, right? They said they're using insurrection, and now we have people saying it's worse than 9/11 and Pearl Harbor and all these other things combined. And it's like, no, you idiot. It's a riot, yes, and it's wrong, yes, but it's not 9/11.
Right.
But so now the media finally, like they just finally got the thing that they wanted for all of 2020, which was Trump supporters rioting, and so now they just, even today, that's the only thing with Democrats heading into the midterms. That's the only thing that they have is just this investigation, and they have nothing else because everything else has just turned terrible under this administration, and so thankfully, a lot of people see through the nonsense that the media was trying to sell them in 2020. Right. But the January 6th riot has been used by the media to kind of retcon a lot of what happened the year prior. And probably one of the best examples of that was actually, it was shortly after January 6th. It was the New York Times story. I referenced it in the book. And it was a New York Times story about how, Republicans are whatabouting January 6th with the BLM riots. But the author of the piece wrote it as such as highlighting isolated incidences of property damage. We're talking about a minimum $2 billion worth of damage across the country over many months, in sometimes in the same cities multiple times, like Portland. That's far from being just these isolated examples of just property damage, and also people died. That's it. I mean, we had over. The official death tolls puts it over 20, but I mean, you kind of have to think of who died. Maybe in kind of the aftermath weeks afterward. But it's just so aggravating again about because Trump supporters rioted for one day, January 6th, and all the other stuff doesn't matter anymore. And I knew, and I knew that, and that's why I was kind of angry at the Trump supporters on January 6th, because in that moment I knew, like, oh my gosh, like they just gave this to them on a silver platter, and all the work I did prior to that on the national stage and national conversation, because before they were trying to ignore it. Now, not only can they now they can say, yes, this happened, maybe,
right,
but it doesn't matter because January 6th, and it's just there's just so much hypocrisy and just so much double standards with everything, and again, for me, it just goes back to just rioting is bad. It's bad.
Don't riot.
Just don't riot, and it's very, very, very frustrating.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of it.
As we wrap here, I want to get your opinion on this. As the media is going to clearly be in the tank for these rioters on the left. It seems like we already saw this through the fiery but mostly peaceful sort of weird trying to whitewash it. That's always going to be a thing. How do we as conservatives respond to that effectively?
Buy my book.
There you go.
Well, I say that, but I mean, now more than ever, it's really important to support media and media companies like Town Hall and others who are actually going to be willing to actually just tell the basic truth about these things. And it's really sad, and I'm not saying this to like brag, but I've had people come up to me saying like, "Oh, you're a hero, and you're so awesome," and I appreciate it, but like I'm not a hero, I'm just a reporter. But it speaks to just doing the bare minimum of what journalism used to be today is now all of a sudden this kind of saint almost in people's eyes, and that's because the rest of the media has debased themselves just so, and it's far from just the rise. It's the Trump presidency and all the scandals and all this other stuff. It happens in big and small ways. So I mean, people's faith, understandably, in the rest of the media is very, very lost, and for some reason the people here in the DC bubble just think that they're the stupid, they're the ones that are wrong and they're going to continue doing it. But even today, I mean, really, it's just you have to support the news outlets, and now it's not even just news outlet. I mean, people support people on Substack. I mean, and there's a reason why those people are popular.
Right.
It's no longer about the companies. It's now more about the individual reporters, because you literally now today, unfortunately, have to seek out these individual people who are willing to actually tell the truth about whatever topic it is. And that, if that's where the media is going to go, okay, I mean, I'll be fine because I've worked really hard to make sure that what I report's been accurate, and if it's not, then correct it, and take responsibility for that. Thankfully, it hasn't happened too much, because it's very simple when you cover a riot. It's just like, hey, here's a writer. Here's a writing, but. When it extends to even just like something like I've been focusing on the southern border, the crisis, and doing that, there's independent people who do that and are supported because, again, outside of Fox News, there's no like mega big companies that are really focusing on telling the daily stories. They pop up every once in a while and say, hey, okay, now here's a number or something. But so really, it's I know it's tough, but I mean, you have to support. You have to support the people who are actually going out and doing the work.
Well, if we want to support it, where can we purchase your book?
So Amazon, understandably, if you don't want to give it to Amazon, you can also Barnes & Noble, also I think Thrift Books, but you can also go to my website, juliorosas.com. There's some links there to, it's also audiobook version and ebook version. If you do buy the audio version, you'll hear my voice because I was the one that narrated it. I didn't want to, just because I knew like it was completely new, and it was a slog. It was a slog, but at the same time, this is my story.
It's your story. You got it.
It only makes sense to do it. Now, if Morgan Freeman wanted to narrate it, then
we'll keep Mr. Freeman in our minds here. That was Julio Rosas, senior writer at townhall.com and author of the new book Fiery but Mostly Peaceful: The 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. Julio, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.